Hello friends, welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we will learn about the timely, relevant and integral concept of urban sustainability. I am Dr. Deeksha Bajpai Tiwari from Department of Geography, Dayal Singh College, University of Delhi. The learning objectives of the present module are to comprehend the concept of sustainable development, understand the concept of urban resilience, to understand the concept of ecological footprints. The city, currently the overriding form of human settlement, typifies and exhibits the deep-seated apprehensions of the human condition. In an era of where globalization is on the rise, urban life pulls people into zones of severe interconnectivity. Cities are characterized as places of passion, hopes and dreams. Nevertheless, they are entering an epoch of prolonged crisis. All urban settlements are growing through a practical crisis of sustainability, while human beings face a wide-ranging crisis of social life on this planet. We need to understand that planning for density is excellent only when it is based on high-quality planning and when the conditions for greater than before density are properly designed. Vehicles that are electric are effective only when renewable resources are brought into play and when the vehicles do not become part of an obsession of green consumption. Although slums are often places of wretched housing, they can also be places of vibrant life and livelihoods. However, defending them as being productive too, just like normal cities, is to concede that economic productivity is the preeminent quantifier of what is good. Inclusion is good only when the terms of positive exclusion are negotiated with care, transparency, and so on. Cities are at the center of these crises across the world. We are facing crises of sustainability, resilience, security, stability, and adaptation. Countless of our cities have become extensive and swollen zones of unsustainability. Issues and problems associated with climate change or sustainable water supply to those relating to increasing economic disparity or the breakup of communities, processes such as increasing resource use or mounting cultural differences, nuisance that we once responded to as remarkable concerns are now bearing back on us in a whirl of multiple pressures. Cities are at the local point of this human constructed maelstrom. Urban areas' resilience is determined by the following components: governance networks, which includes institutional structures and organizations, social dynamics, people interacting with city and their environment, built environment, ecosystem services in urban landscapes, and metabolic flows, production supply and consumption change, flows of information, energy, matter and through the city. For all their effervescence and liveliness, cities face a mounting challenge to offer safe, sound and sustainable places to live. Unwaveringly, the world's most livable cities, Melbourne, Munich, Vancouver and Vienna, are quite unsustainable in global ecological terms. If all city residents across the globe consumed at the rate of the world's most livable cities, the planet would be in disastrous trouble. Regardless of their inconsequential geographical footprint, cities are accountable for more than 80% of global energy consumption, and a number of the world's most magnificent, exciting cities contribute at a proportionally much higher rate. As many writers now tell us, our cities confront a various crises of sustainability, be it economic, ecological, political and cultural. For example, in Mike Davis's words, slums are all the time more becoming a part of our cities. Every day, 180,000 people join the global urban population. Each year, the equivalent of 2 cities the size of Tokyo are built. 1 in 6 urban dwellers live in slums, and we are heading towards that black figure of 2 degrees Celsius global warming. UN Habitat research suggests that over the next decade, practically all of the world's population growth will occur in cities with massive consequences for infrastructure stress. Distinguishing properties of sustainability include stability, robustness, resilience, durability. Why under these conditions do we concentrate on symptomatic wayouts, for example, on white paint on roofs to amplify the albedo of the city, on bulldozers to clear away unnecessary and lopsided urban dwellers, and on cranes to build new high-rise apartments in the hinterlands of cities of the new world? Why do we dither between easy quick fix solutions and complex suspension when it is so apparent that something much more essential needs to be done? Slum clearance appears to work for a while in particular locales, but displaced people, especially those who are shifted to the margin, tend to move back to more central urban sites of continuing hopelessness, seeking to maintain livelihoods. White roofs deflect heat in the cities of the global north, whereas in the global south, intensifying weather shifts and rising sea levels bring the chaos of floods. Cities are at the heart of the problems facing this planet, but developing a positive and sustainable mode of urban living is the only way that we will be able to sustain social life as we know it past the end of this century. In fact, given the world's current population growth, sustainably increasing the density of our urban centers or settlements along with increasing energy efficiency and decreasing resource use is the only alternative. It is simply no longer the case that building rural idyls on small, self-contained plots of land can save the planet. If without changing other considerations, we started dividing the non-urban world into rural allotments to cope with a burgeoning global population, we would only speed up the crisis. According to the World Bank 2014 report, the United States has only 0.5 hectares arable land per citizen, while China has 0.08 hectares. Unless there was a revolution in the way we live, neither would allow for allotment self-sufficiency. We are now in the 4th phase of the Anthropocene period. If Tribalia, Agraria and Industria were formerly leading and continuing ways of living, the most recent phase, still unnamed, began with our capacity to make our own lives on this planet unsustainable. Through the intersection of technoscience and capitalism, from bioengineering to hypercommodification, we are now reconstituting the basic building blocks of nature, including our own bodies, and in some way, knowingly or unknowingly, becoming self-detrimental too. Talking all the way about sustainability and resilience, for a large wealthy minority in some parts of the world, life in the city is materially good. The well-to-do urban global north continues to export an increasing number of the urban problems associated with crude industrialism to the global south or to the peripheral zones of their own countries. Under Dickensian conditions, the hardware supporting urban lifestyles is being produced in places such as China, Dhaka and Bangladesh. This occurs whereas post-industrial cities are dressed in the superficial glamour of urban renewal. Formerly unexciting central business districts have been turned into entertainment zones. Any sense of face-to-face soreness or community isolation is recolored by the relentless essentials of the Facebook and media connectivity. The world's poster cities come into sight as cleaner, brighter and more pulsating than ever before. In the 2000s, Auden's mass-produced Hobbesian man has given way to the self-projecting urbanite who can choose amongst the amazing array of consumption opportunities on offer. In many cities across the world, fragmentary community relations have become secondary or residual, confined to disconnected periods of people's lives or to moments of celebratory focus. Urban dwellers increasingly come together in moments of screen time or as passing strangers in the street, moving in parallel and consuming parallel lifestyle possibilities. One lineage of academic and popular writers celebrates this development. Richard Florida's book, Who's Your City?, turns the important life-forming question of where do you want to live into a commodity choice. Why have others missed the where factor? He asks disingenuously. Perhaps it's because so few of us have the understanding or mental framework necessary to make informed decisions about location. Florida said in the year 2009. The word future now seems to summon up either post-human scenarios of technoscience or Greenfield's new cities that have given us the disasters of the technopolis, the multifunction polis, and the less than acceptable outcomes of zones that look best from the air. For a greenfield site, Canberra was beautifully designed as a garden city, but it for the most part failed to think about transport other than cars or to accomplish cultural vibrancy. Brasilia was designed to look like a butterfly from above, but has been criticized as a futuristic fantasy. Dubai is conceivably the ultimate futuristic fantasy by means of high-end residential zones that reach into the ocean, designed from the air to look like a palm tree or planet Earth. For a period, Dubai fit around on the edge of ecological and economic disaster. Futurism is not turning it around now. In fact, to a certain extent, the careful planners of the land department and those solid developers who are now trying to make an extraordinary city in which ordinary people live sustainably. The principal way in which we currently imagine the future can possibly best be seen in corporate advertising of the many companies that project the proposal of a good city as a high-tech smart city. It is visible in the global mammoth events in which a global imaginary of capitalism, technoscience and planetary saga come together. Techno-scientific projections of connectivity and competence are brought together with global projections of material wealth and local projections of lifestyle preferences. The smart city future is therefore imagined as a contradictory mixture of controlled, regulated, inside and as far from the messiness of uncultivated nature and organic chance as possible, whereas contradictorily also being serendipitously exciting for all the individuals who inhabit that world. Out of place and badly conceived planning has over and over again produced inferior outcomes than has leaving the process to serendipity, but in the background of global crisis, we now require long-term planning more than ever. Cities convey our aspirations and hopes. They are local citadels of the evolving global urban system, built to protect us from our fears and insecurities. Family by family, person by person, the world's population is gravitating towards the bright lights of urban intensity and high mass consumption. Across the globe, unevenly but inexorably, people have been entering the process that Raymond Williams in the year 1974 called mobile privatization, making our lives increasingly private and linking to the public more than to each other by the means of television, the internet, the social media than by public engagement in the street or in the community settings. Individual by individual, the dwellers of cities turn on air conditioners to deal with the elevated temperatures we all have produced and to fulfill our private needs for increasing levels of comfort, thus ironically increasing the production of greenhouse gases which lead to higher temperatures. In other words, cities become a symbol of the best and the worst of us. They are the home to the most ridiculous and the very grandest things that we can accomplish. On the other hand, to make better of them, we need to pay attention to our own weaknesses. To put it in other way, badly conceived utopian planning has in the past shaped outcomes that are unsustainable both objectively and emotionally. But this does not mean that communities and municipalities, together with planning and architectural experts, should not get together to bestow and argue over the future directions of the whole city, its priorities and directions, even if this means revisiting first principles. Optimistic, sustainable urban development requires out of the ordinary visions that take seriously the essential importance of economic, ecological, political and cultural factors. In particular, questions of culture need to be taken more seriously and directly. This is not to surrender to the culturalist view that the aesthetic visions of high-end architects should drive the remaking of cities. To a certain extent, it is to argue for a city where cultural friction is returned to the streets and where cars give way to people, public spaces, basketball courts and urban food gardens. It sounds simple, but current practices remain caught in unsuitable prevailing understandings. Language is part of the problem, but it goes deeper to the relationship between knowledge, power and practice. As a means of going in a different direction, we begin with the 4 social domains that we earlier posited as useful for understanding the human condition: the economic, ecological, political and cultural. A city or urban area can be defined as a human settlement characterized economically, politically and culturally by a noteworthy infrastructural base, a high density of population, whether it be as natives, working people or transitory visitors, and what is perceived to be a huge proportion of constructed surface area relative to the rest of the region. Within that area, there may also be smaller zones of non-built up, green or brown sites used for agriculture, recreational, storage, waste disposal or other rationale. A suburban area can be defined as a comparatively densely inhabited urban district characterized by a prevalence of housing land use as a residential zone in an urban area contiguous with a city center, as a zone outside the politically defined limits of a city center, or as a zone on the outer rim of an urban region, sometimes also called peri-urban area. For example, suburban areas in cities of Global South can be made up of village communities or squatter settlements, sometimes edged by bushland. This is also including settlements or squatter areas. Thus, our definition of suburb does not make the customary distinction between formal suburbs and informal or squatter settlements. They are, in our terms, different forms of suburbanization. A peri-urban area is a zone of transition from the rural to the urban. These areas, time and again, form the immediate urban-rural interface and may eventually evolve into being wholly urban. Peri-urban areas are lived-in environments. The majority of peri-urban areas are on the periphery of established urban areas, but they may also be clusters of residential development within rural landscapes and along transport routes. Peri-urban areas in the global north are most commonly an outcome of the continuing process of suburbanization or urban sprawl, even though this is different in places where usual land relations continue to prevail. A hinterland area can be defined as a rural area that is located sufficiently close to a main urban center for its inhabitants to orient a noteworthy proportion of their activities to the dominant urban area in their region. A rural area is an area that is either sparsely settled or has a relatively dispersed population with no cities or major towns. Even though agriculture still plays an imperative part in numerous rural areas, other sources of income have developed, such as rural tourism, small-scale manufacturing activities, residential economy, location of retirees, and energy production. A rural area can be characterized either by its constructed, though non-industrial ecology, or its relatively homegrown ecology. All these zones bear on the formation and reproduction of cities or urban settlements. They are spatial domains. On the other hand, there is another way of understanding spatial domains that complements what has just been outlined. It concerns processes rather than zones. To be precise, processes of globalization and localization. Sustainability must be pursued in all the three dimensions: economic policies, social policies, and environmental policies. And these policies are to be framed in the context of efficiency, equity, and environmental sustainability. Identifying, building, and promoting links between social, economic, and environmental goals is both possible and critical to building cities that work. Cities in the current world are characterized by extreme global interconnections. Consequently, understanding processes of globalization and localization is essential. Globalization is always enacted at the concrete local level. Even the global financial crisis was evident in patterns of local practice, including how poor people bought houses in depressed urban neighborhoods such as in New York and Miami. At the same time, the feasibility of the local now for the most part depends on the global. The crisis made stronger the notions of glocalization or the glocal have been part of the vocabulary of the increasing transdisciplinary field of global studies. We can see Robertson contemporary globalization, they argue, is not the chief or only cause of global environmental change, although it has without doubt intensified such change to the point where we are moving towards an environmental crisis of planetary proportions. Cities are crossed by diverse kinds of globalization processes. One possible way of enlightening our analytical understanding of different kinds of globalization to help with this overlaying spatial change involves the following set of distinctions. The first one, embodied globalization. These are the movements of people across the world. Second, object extended globalization. The movements of objects across the world, in particular traded commodities. The third one, agency extended globalization. The movements of agents of institutions such as corporations, NGOs, and states. Next, symbolically extended globalization. The movements of symbols across the world, often carried as objects, but also now overwhelmingly projected as electronic images. Disembodied globalization. The movements of immaterial things and processes, electronic text, and encoded capital. Cities have options, constrained options, about how they handle these different ways of globalization. Embodied globalization extends across the globe in networks of the movement of people, but it is also the most transparently localized in the way in which it is lived. Migrants usually come to the particular places, increasingly urban places, through chains of connection. Those link localities, families, and ethnic diasporas. On the other hand, at the most materially abstract end of the spectrum, disembodied globalization, although always localizing in some way or the other and with thoughtful consequences for how people live locally, is the least embedded in local places. All of this means that the current approach to global cities, to the extent that it emphasizes global financial connectivity, is reductive and skewed. Ever since Ferdinand Tönnies in the year 1963 introduced the terms Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft to explain a change from a society dominated by relatively steady, mainly non-urban communities that emphasized mutual obligation and trust, Gemeinschaft, to further mobile, extremely urbanized societies in which individual self-interest comes to the fore, Gesellschaften, commentators have been interested in the ever-changing nature of community. Until recently, belonging to a community was more often than not seen as unqualifiedly positive. While community is now seen in more circumspect terms, the veering away of community is still principally interpreted as being the cause of social problems. Taking all of this together, sustainability thus relates not only to questions of environmental crisis or to the nexus between economy and ecology. It also concerns the human condition from the local to the global, including both the nature of urban settlements and the forms that community life takes. It concerns the fundamental question of how we are to live and how to be more resilient and attain sustainability. To conclude, the three pillars of the concept of sustainability are as follows, on the basis of which the whole sustainability can be described or explained: environment, economy, and social. I is equal to P into A into T, where I is environmental impact, P is population, A is affluence, and T is technology. For developing urban sustainability, the cities have to be compact, early transit oriented, geared towards sustainable living and resource pooling. Thank you.